in this session, we're going to be focusing on rewilding, right? That's the topic that we're going to be talking about. But before we do that, clearly the whole topic of nature is moving up in the, in the international agenda for business in particular, right? Following COP15 in December. Also, the science-based target for nature were released yesterday, right? So the instruments also coming up. And so I wanted to ask you, Julien, as a start to set the stage before we go into rewilding. You are working for Cartier for Nature. You're an expert on biodiversity, on nature. That's what you've done your whole life. Why should business care about nature? And what does Cartier for Nature do about that?
Yes, thank you very much, Katell, and good afternoon, everyone. So I think I will start with the basics and to repeat again that we all rely on nature for our living and also for our economy. And nature is also sending us signals like heat waves or severe droughts in Kenya or floodings in Germany. And these signals, they tell us that we have gone beyond the limits. And we heard this morning very often. And we have gone beyond the limits because our development has been at the expense of the environment. So we have now to care for nature. And caring for nature means we need to put more efforts, put more resources. And by resources, I also mean funding resources. And if we look at the scale of the challenge, we also all know that public funding will not be enough. We cannot rely on only public funding to address those challenges, and everybody has to play a part, including the business sector. So now to come to your question, why Cartier also engage in that endeavor? Yes, what is important is that on first hand, Cartier has a very ambitious CSR strategy to measure, to reduce, and to mitigate its impact. And because, and I insist it's important, because this is already in place, then the Cartier wanted to do more and to play a proactive role and to also act beyond its operations, and hence the creation of a philanthropic initiative, Cartier for Nature. So we are a foundation, we do grants, we support NGOs across the world that are engaged for the protection and restoration of healthy ecosystems. And we look for organizations that are able to measure and also to have an impact and that are engaged over the long term. And this is how we came to know Rewilding Europe here.
Okay, thanks. So clearly what you're saying is that it's an extra step of commitment through investment, and this is why this foundation has been created to do that, as one of the way corporates can indeed invest in nature. And so one of the organizations that Cartier for Nature is investing in is Rewilding Europe, where you are the head of landscape. So can you explain to me, again, because I've done it, but for the audience, what is rewilding? What does that mean?
All right. Thank you. So what is rewilding? That's an interesting question. It's an approach to conservation and ecological restoration that Rewilding Europe has been pioneering across Europe for over a decade now. And there's different ways of summarizing it. One is that is a little bit catchy, is that it's a little bit like the gold standard of ecological restoration. It's a way of harnessing nature's forces to enable it to restore itself as much as possible. So it's about giving more space to nature, giving time for nature also to restore itself, and drive the kind of large-scale and long-term transformations that we need for nature recovery, for addressing climate change, both through mitigation and adaptation. And also, and this is, I think, an interesting dimension, there's also a clear human dimension to the way rewilding is practiced, because many of the places where this kind of large-scale, long-term transformation is possible are also places that often are lacking a little bit of perspectives in terms of their economic and social development. There are many places in Europe where rural peoples and landscapes are struggling.
So can you give us a very concrete example of one of the rewilding projects that you are conducting in Europe, for instance?
Yeah, so one of these landscapes that I was mentioning is in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. So this is an area that has suffered from quite severe depopulation. People have left the countryside. Their way of life was not economically viable. They had better opportunities in Bucharest, elsewhere in Europe. And so the land was abandoned and they were lacking perspective. So what we did there as part of our rewilding strategies, we brought back European bison. So this is a big mammal. It weighs, adult males weigh over a ton. And if you have a big herd of bison in a natural ecosystem, they have a significant effect on the biodiversity there. And they help maintain the kind of mosaic of grasslands and shrublands and forests that make this landscape what it is and what it was, and that enhance the biodiversity there. But what's interesting is that the people that are still living in this landscape, they now have this new asset, the bison, that they can build a whole new economy around. And so we're helping them do that. We're investing in building capacity, providing technical advice, but also funding so that they can create new tourism-related businesses where people come to this landscape and they can come and visit the bison, see the bison, and this provides jobs, income opportunities for local people, and there's plenty of young entrepreneurs who are seizing this opportunity now. And
so when we were preparing, you also said, because of the title of this whole session, Nature-Based Solution, that rewilding was not a solution, that it was an approach. Can you say a bit more about that?
Well, I think, so we're working on multiple dimensions of these landscapes. The ecological side, so we're, in the case of Romania, introducing an ecosystem engineer, a large species that's going to bring new dynamics to this ecosystem. We're working also on the social and economic dimensions of this landscape, working with local people on creating jobs and entrepreneurial opportunities. We're also working on the culture and making sure that this bison that is now there is something that people value, and that they feel proud of, and that it becomes something that's really fully appropriated. And so it's this kind of multi-pronged approach that makes this transformative, and I think this is what separates rewilding from just another technical fix, if you like, to the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, thanks for that. Is that what attracted Cartier for Nature into investing in these particular projects, rather than a more, let's say, classic protection or restoration effort?
Yes, exactly. I think we like the approach that it's based on ecosystem functions.
Yeah.
It's complex, of course, but it's having an impact on biodiversity, climate, and people. And it's also showing that restoring nature is a big engagement. It can take decades. So it's not a simple solution. You need to take into consideration all the elements, and you need to also have good science. So that's one of the reasons. And the other reason you mentioned, it's an approach, and it's a positive approach. It's a mindset. It's a positive mindset. It's about bringing back lost species into those landscapes. It's also about bringing back people and economic opportunities in this landscape. So it's really changing the narrative also, and to see the nature as an opportunity.
Right. So how is that different from the more, let's say, traditional philanthropic approach to, let's say, protecting nature? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, all the mechanisms that Fabien just highlighted, that they take time. They are engaged in very large landscapes across the globe, in Europe, with multiple partners. So many things can happen along the way. And if we want to support them in the right way, we need to provide them with a lot of maximum of flexibility.
You mean flexibility of the funding?
Exactly.
With no conditionality, right?
Exactly. So this is what differs from maybe traditional philanthropy, which is maybe based more on project-based approach or restricted funding. And this is So we call it unrestricted funding.
D'accord.
And this is something that maybe corporate foundation can do, because we don't have the constraints that maybe investors or let's say some public agency they have. So yes, providing flexibility and also maybe seeing beyond your funding support, because with this layer of flexible funding, the organization is also able to play with other sources of funding, such as public funding or maybe de-risking for investment. So this is also leveraging funding. And I said at the beginning, we need more and more funding towards.
And are you helping them directly with that, this connection that you have through Cartier with public organization, or de-risking, targeting particular investors to invest more in the project?
I would say not directly, but we are having discussions, and we need to understand also where are their needs and how we can best support them.
Right. And typically also traditional philanthropy on nature tends to focus on the global south, no? So what was the interest for you to invest in Europe?
Exactly, because it's in Europe, and also showing that you can have the same approaches that you have in the global south, but you can also have them in Europe at our doors. And one of the landscape in Spain is maybe only 2 hours drive from Madrid. So you have the population of Madrid that can directly access those projects.
So it's an important message, I think, to give, is that we don't need to go like far away. And we have discussion in other sessions about different geographies, but there is plenty of work to do in Europe in rewilding. So clearly we understand the dynamic of this type of supporter, a philanthropy that can provide long-term de-risk for others. Can you give an illustration of a project where a corporate directly invests in a rewilding project? Do you have an illustration?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, of course, we're very grateful for Cartier for Nature to be supporting our work in Romania, and it is a long-term initiative. We started the work there over 10 years ago now in partnership with WWF, in fact, and there's still a lot of work to do because we need to change people's mindsets and build a whole new economy there.
So what type of a time frame are we talking about, roughly, just to get an idea? You said
a few decades, probably.
A few decades.
I mean, there's a number of steps, of course, and we see results already. But the kind of transformation we're aiming for is systemic. It's not just a project. It's not just a solution, as we were saying. It's broader and deeper than that.
Yeah.
It does bring opportunities for investment. So we've been supporting local people in creating these guest houses or having small businesses locally owned businesses. These are all investment opportunities. And so we are channeling some private investment into those ventures. But it's, of course, difficult to scale rapidly. The kinds of volumes we're speaking of are somewhat limited, so it's a particular kind of investor that's going to be interested by this. But there are other places where there's a stronger enabling environment for corporate investment, and the example I have in mind is the work we're doing in Scotland, where there is an established mechanism to generate revenue from selling carbon credits from woodland restoration and peatland restoration. And so we're harnessing this opportunity to go further and scale up our rewilding efforts there. And this is really a very important opportunity, I think, for rewilding to contribute to, in particular, the climate challenge. For those of you in the audience who are not familiar with what a peatland is, these are ecosystems where the soil contains a very high concentration or proportion of organic matter that has not decomposed, so dead leaves, dead roots, and it hasn't decomposed because the soil is saturated with water permanently, so there's no oxygen reaching this organic matter, and so it stays there. And this is all carbon that's staying in the soil. And it's one of the biggest natural stores of carbon on the planet across mostly the global north. And the thing is that, in particular in Europe, we've been very good at draining these peatlands to try and make them available for industrial forestry, from some types of agriculture. And in some places, we even use the peat for our own needs as fuel, for heating and cooking. And so we really need to reverse that degradation and restore these peatlands. And so there's massive potential for this in Scotland. And luckily, people can convert this into carbon credits, and this can then be invested in, and landowners there can basically make a living from restoring their land, which is exactly what we need to do to scale things up.
Thanks. So if I'm sitting in this audience, I work for a corporate company, and I'm listening to you now, and I'm thinking, that sounds interesting. I like this systemic approach. How do I get started? Like for, I don't know, some people here who might head the sustainability division of a company or CSR. How do they get started in their company to promote rewilding, or to start promoting and raising awareness to later on maybe invest in this project?
Well, raising awareness is, of course, the first step, and making yourselves familiar, perhaps, and broadening your perspective on what it means to act for nature recovery and this kind of transformative change. And there's plenty of case studies that you can look at. A key point to then move into action is also to consider that although Rewilding Europe is focused on large landscapes, you can do some rewilding at any scale, as long as you're making progress in the right direction. And so if you work for a company or own a company that has some land around your buildings, around your factory, you can do some rewilding there rather than keeping it with a short lawn of fluorescent green grass.
I'm thinking about our campus, for instance, right?
There you go.
So you can do
that on
you
can do some rewilding anywhere. And then, of course, some sectors manage much more land. If you think of the forestry or agricultural and food sectors, massive areas of land there where there's a lot of scope for giving a bit more space to wild nature. So those are sort of very straightforward examples that one can get into.
And is Rewilding Europe actually actively helping these corporates to pass that first stage? Is that something that you do?
We're not an advisory
I'm just trying
firm.
to get people started here.
Yeah. But
you have good case studies maybe to share?
Yes, and we also have a network of rewilding initiatives that we support called the European Rewilding Network.
Oh, okay.
And so there's a whole range of initiatives there that we are not doing ourselves.
Yeah.
But we're bringing these people together to share experiences, learn from each other, and we provide some services to them to help them move forward and scale up and inspire others. And so there's space in there for corporates to engage if they're doing some rewilding.
Okay, great. Thanks you very much. From your perspective, again, if I'm a philanthropic association in the room and also want to invest in this type of projects, what would be the best way to start? Because we see it's really a long-term investment, no strings attached, no outcome-based. So what's the pitch you will give them to still invest and get it done?
That's the key, the long-term thing. Just before going into that, I'm just coming back on, Fabien mentioned that the different funding sources, including the climate finance and the carbon offsets. And as a philanthropic engagement, this is not what we are doing.
Exactly.
This is what companies are doing. Philanthropy is supporting Rewilding or any other NGOs for its mission, to achieve its mission.
That's right.
So, and that mission is very long-term, decades.
Right.
So I mentioned you need to provide flexibility. You need to understand their needs, be there when they have difficulties or when they need to adapt. So, which means that you have to build that trust relationship with the partners. And in order to be able to do that, you need to also build your in-house capacities. So, if I will encourage other philanthropists to do that, the first thing is really to invest in their capacities and in their resources to be able to engage with these organizations. And it's
meaning
also
concretely hiring biodiversity or nature specialists like...
Exactly.
people with an ecological background.
Exactly, yeah. I come from the NGO conservation world, and I've joined the corporate philanthropy, and I think it's a good move from Cartier for nature. And so it's to understand their needs, but it's also you can play a role which goes beyond funding, only beyond signing checks. You can also activate your networks. You can showcase their work. You can make links with other organizations. So you can also play a different role, which goes really beyond only giving money.
Yeah, and so for this particular support that you're providing with Rewilding Europe, what's your dream in terms of what they could achieve? I mean, what would be successful for Cartier for Nature to have achieved maybe in 10 years?
Yeah, I mentioned the 3 pillars, that they have an impact on climate, biodiversity, and people. I think that link with biodiversity, nature, and people is really what we care about. We heard this morning Mathieu Ricard mentioning sustainable harmony, and I think that's really resonates with us, the harmony between people and nature, and that's really the impact we are looking for.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Now we are reaching our time here together. So again, here you have a room of changemakers, influential people. So if there is one key message that you would like to, leave them with when it comes to rewilding, what would that be?
Let's do it.
I don't know. Is it clear enough what it is and what you all can do about it? Raise your hands if it's a yes. Good job, guys. What about you, Julien? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think it's a message of hope. So yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah. So again, if you are interested in rewilding, come and talk to them. They're right here. They can also, they can be reached on the app, but they're right here. You can speak with them. If you're a corporate, want to get started, if you're a philanthropy and you want to invest on the long term for people and the planet, ladies and gentlemen, that was Julien and Fabien. Thank you very much.